Hey YouTube, Neko Mimi Anime here, and today I'd like to bring you my mini review series for April 2015. This is the series where I take a brief look at the shows I've watched in a given month and give my opinions on them. These are in no way intended to be a serious critique or analytical review, but rather just my thoughts and a quick rundown of the anime I've watched and whether or not I recommend them. So please take these with a grain of salt and don't take what I say too seriously. Also, I'm sorry for taking so long to get this out again. I've been finding that I don't have as much time in a month as I thought I had, so getting these out on time has proven to be a bit problematic. I think I'm going to start writing and recording these reviews for each show I watch immediately after watching them, so at the end of the month I can just quickly edit everything together. I'm also realizing I don't watch as much anime as I used to. There were times when I could watch 4 shows in a week. Now I'm lucky to watch 4 in a month. But I guess that is just part of growing up and having responsibilities you have to put first. Also, I would like to note that I am working on my pronunciation of R, which apparently doesn't even exist in Japanese. It is only used in Romaji, so I can almost guarantee I have butchered a lot of names here, so please just bear with me. Hopefully I'll get this down a little better in the future. Hyakko. Ayumi Nono Miura had a rough time fitting in with her classmates in the past. She is awkward and clumsy and always finds herself making mistakes that seem to separate her from her classmates. All she wants is to make friends and live an ordinary high school life. However, her luck changes when she makes yet another mistake and gets lost on her first day of high school due to the school's enormous size. This leads to her meeting Tatsuku Izuka. The two quickly become friends, which also leads her to meet Toroka Kageyama and Suzume Sayatome. Finally feeling as if she fits in with her classmates, she quickly discovers that being friends with this group of people is anything but ordinary. If there is one thing this show excels at, it is comedy. It is an absolute riot. It has a good deal of slapstick, but also just really clever dialogue. Despite having a great deal of slapstick, the humor is pretty intelligent while still remaining playful and lighthearted. There are some jokes that border a bit on the juvenile or rely on perversion, but there are also a great deal of well thought out and just genuinely funny moments. There is also a good amount of Japanese humor, so if you are a fan of that, this show has got you covered. It's probably a good idea to choose a good fan subgroup with translation notes for this one to explain some of the jokes, because some are very Japanese and relate to Japanese culture, or even jokes about the writing of characters' names in kanji. The humor is accompanied by a good cast of characters. I won't deny there are a great deal of stereotypes here, especially with the minor characters, but it's still hard not to like them. The minor characters range from your typical rebel/delinquent who denies being a delinquent, to shy and socially awkward, to cute female otaku with glasses, to overenthusiastic female bisexual who sexually harasses other females, etc. They aren't particularly deep characters and don't go through much personal development, but they work well for creating an environment set up for comedy, and most importantly, are, for the most part, very likable. I feel like the main characters are the strongest. The 4 main girls, Ayumi, Suzume, Tatsuki, and Todako, play off each other really well. They all feel very distinct from one another and both complement and clash with each other to great comedic effect. They also go through the most character development out of anyone in the show, although it isn't particularly surprising given the fact they are main characters. It isn't that great a deal of development, but there is a little growth. They aren't the most original characters. They do borrow from a few anime stereotypes, but on the whole, their characters feel unique, and I won't be forgetting about them anytime soon. In fact, I would go as far to say they are one of my favorite group of 4 characters I have seen in a long time. I am a bit on the fence about the art style. Part of me really likes the slightly different look the show has, but another part feels like it comes off looking a bit budget level. I guess the art and animation on a whole is just okay, but nothing really impressive. I will say that the show does have its own unique look. Maybe this is just me though and personal preference. For the most part, I really did like the character designs for the main characters. I felt they looked pretty unique, especially Tatsuki. The secondary characters were kind of hit or miss though. Some looked a little generic and others were faces that I'll definitely remember. The show definitely is a slice of life show and there is very little story. It pretty much just follows the group's day-to-day antics, but it works well for the show. There are a few story elements they throw in that got my curiosity going, and the story does pick up a bit in the last few episodes, but that really isn't the point of this show anyway. Nonetheless, these story elements were interesting, and I enjoyed watching them unfold. And despite all the comedy, they did throw in some good emotional moments. There were some rather dramatic events that really made the characters feel human and made me care about them even more. This helped the show feel a little more rounded out and gave it some substance. I also really liked the way they did the final episode. At first I wasn't sure about it. I thought it was going to be a bit boring, but by the end I realized I had gotten sucked right in. It was an interesting way to end the show and really put everything in context and made me appreciate the show that much more. I can't comment on it too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but I just really wanted to mention it. Overall, this is a very fun show. It is a great comedic slice of life that often had me barely able to contain my laughter. If you are looking for something short and sweet that doesn't take itself too seriously and you just want a good laugh, I highly recommend you check Hyakko out. Heaven's Lost Property the Movie, The Angeloid of Clockwork. Heaven's Lost Property the Movie, The Angeloid of Clockwork, is the third anime entry in the series and follows a new character, Hiyori Kazuna, who is an adorable and sweet girl who for some reason, unbeknownst to man, has a crush on Tomiki. However, while she may seem like your ordinary cutie, there is more than meets the eye with this girl. This is a hard one for me to properly critique. On one hand, I absolutely love this series, and on the other, I absolutely hate recaps. This movie is made up of a good portion of recap, with sprinkles of new scenes thrown in, and part original story. Roughly a third of the movie takes scenes from the first and second season and shows them from a slightly different perspective, that of the new character introduced, Hiyori Kazuna. On one hand, it was really boring watching bits and pieces of past episodes strung together. I was just constantly on edge waiting for the new stuff to start. On the other hand, there was a new element to these scenes because of Hiyori's presence, and it was kind of amusing to see how she was worked into these scenes. There are also some completely new scenes mixed in here, so you really can't just skip to the original story part of the movie. You would lose a lot of context for what happens later. Once I got past all the recap and into the new material, I was sucked right in. Just like the TV show, this movie is very entertaining and is a blast to watch. It needs to be made clear, however, if you are expecting the traditional Sora no Otoshimono's comedy romp, this may disappoint on that front. While there are some very funny moments, this takes on a much more serious tone than the first two seasons. And honestly, it became a little too serious in my opinion. I understand that the series is drawing to a close and they are trying to wrap up the story, but I really didn't like the direction they took with this. I can't say much without spoiling anything, but this is just downright sad and depressing, which in my opinion doesn't fit in line with the general tone of this series. It just felt out of place and actually made me a little aggravated they took this direction. I understand that some of Sora no Otoshimono's story elements and themes are a little dark, but I still felt like they could have taken a different approach that would have fit better with the overall vibe of this show. This is really just my personal preference though, and I'm sure many will disagree with me on this. Story-wise, I didn't think there was a whole lot revealed here. That isn't to say the story hasn't moved forward at all, but most of the focus was on the mini story created for the movie itself. It will be interesting to see where the movie goes from here. I think this movie may have been setting up for the next one. Another criticism, which honestly may not be a fair one, is that there is a noticeable difference in quality between scenes from the first season and later material. I noticed a slight blurriness and a lack of clarity in the first season, maybe even a little film grain. For me, this was quite a distraction and really bothered me. This difference is very exaggerated because of all the new scenes they inserted. One moment, the picture will look great, and the next it will look noticeably worse. I don't know if this is due to an encoding error by Funimation, or if it has to do with the original source material. It could just be the result of Kadokawa putting more resources into the second season in the movie than they did the first. Either way, it really bothered me. Character development was typical with the show's norm. There was growth, but not much more than normally occurs. If you have seen the first two seasons, I'm sure you are aware of the development that had been occurring up to this point, and the movie pretty much kept up with that pace for the most part. In my opinion, this show has always had just enough character development for the type of show it is, and that isn't a criticism, so I really can't complain. As usual for this show, the voice acting was top-notch. I'm normally a subtitle guy, but this is one series I have chosen to watch with the English dub, and am I glad I did. Like usual, the cast delivered an outstanding performance, and Colleen Clickenbeard, who voiced the new character Hiyori, did an excellent job. I felt her voice fit the character really well. There isn't really a whole lot I can say about this movie. If you're a fan of Sora no Otoshimono, you probably should check this out. Honestly, it did leave a bit of a sour flavor in my mouth due to the different direction they took, but I still think it's a good movie. If you can get past all the recap, the new material actually is pretty interesting and worth a watch. Non Biyori. This is a show that I discovered through one of those 10-hour loops someone made where they took clips from the show and put them to music and made a ridiculously addicting song out of it. It got me curious about the show, so I decided to check it out, and am I ever glad I did. This show is a nice little slice of life gem. It focuses on a small group of students who live in the middle of nowhere and attend a school that is entirely composed of 5 students. Even though they are all different grade levels, they share a single classroom, and thus unlikely friendships occur. I can't imagine a situation like this actually occurring in a first world country like Japan, and it did irk me a bit, but it was something I just had to overlook. Like I said, this is a slice of life show, and it is a fairly slow-paced one that just focuses on people going about their daily lives. It pretty much just follows the group of friends around as they try to keep themselves occupied in a place where there is seemingly nothing to do. You might think this sounds boring, but somehow the scenarios the show presents were actually really interesting, not to mention quite humorous at times. This had some real laugh-out-loud moments, and they usually involved Lenga-chan. Speaking of Lenga-chan, this show has a really great cast of characters, and I'm really not sure who is my favorite, because they all have qualities that really make them stand out amongst themselves. Lenga-chan is arguably the most unique of the bunch, since most of the other characters seem to borrow from various anime tropes to a certain degree, but I wouldn't say it is to the point of any of them being cliché. Personally, I think I liked Hotaru and Komari the most. I was a bit annoyed, however, by Suguru, who is Komari's and Natsumi's brother. He never says a single word the whole show. He always just nods his head, or when he is about to speak, he gets cut off. I know this was supposed to be funny, but I felt like the joke wore thin pretty fast. I just ended up getting annoyed with him because I felt like they just wasted his character. Plus, I just felt bad for the guy. He is pretty much always the third wheel and has no real relationship with any of his classmates. Seriously, what a miserable childhood this guy must have had. There isn't really any major character development here or a deep storyline, so if you are looking for that, you will be disappointed. That isn't to say there is none, just not much. In my opinion, that is just fine for this show, as it is just a lighthearted, feel good kind of show. There are lots of moments that just put a smile on my face and gave me warm fuzzies. Although part of me does feel really bad for these students for having to live in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do, it was kind of nice just watching everyone be happy with each other's company and looking past their age differences and forming friendships. Speaking of age differences, there is one thing that some people might find a little disconcerting, and that is that Hotaru, a 5th grader, has a crush on Kamali, who is a second year middle schooler, pretty much an 8th grader for those in the US. It isn't just like a look up to her senpai kind of thing either. It is a definite Yuri crush. I absolutely love Yuri, so part of me liked this, but another part felt a bit weird since she is like 11 years old. To be fair though, she does look a lot older than Kamali, who is around 14. The show has a nice soundtrack featuring mainly calm and relaxing music that lends itself well to the scenic nature setting. And the art style lends itself well to all the nature scenes featured throughout the show. While the character designs may not have been the most original I have seen, I thought they looked pretty good. Overall, I really liked this show. It's a great little gem with likable characters in an unlikely setting and has some great slice of life goodness. This show is just full of feel good moments and excels at putting a smile on your face. It is short and sweet at only 12 episodes and an OAD, and it seems to have left a lot of people wanting more because a second season has already been greenlit, and I can't wait to feast my eyes upon it. Saki. There are two genres of TV shows and movies that I generally find to be incredibly boring and avoid at all costs: sports and anything board or card game related such as poker. However, I have been somewhat interested in learning how to play mahjong for a while, so when I heard about Saki, it piqued my interest. What really caught my interest, though, is that this show apparently has a lot of Yuri in it, and I am a total sucker for Yuri. Saki is a great example of why sometimes it is good to broaden your horizons and watch things that aren't necessarily in your comfort zone. This show sucked me in and did not let go. I never thought that a show about mahjong could be so compelling. Saki is the story of a high school girl named Saki, who her whole life has hated playing mahjong. Her family had always gotten angry with her when she beat them, so she never learned the joy of dominating her opponents. However, one day she meets an avid group of mahjong players who just so happen to be members of her school's mahjong club. She soon discovers that she actually likes mahjong when played with and for those who she cares about, and her and the club make it their goal to go to and win the National Mahjong Tournament. Without a doubt, the show's strongest trait is its characters. You would think it would be mahjong, and while the mahjong component is good, the characters are just so great here. And there are a ton of characters, and most are well fleshed out and interesting. At first I thought that the members of the Mahjong Club would be the only ones to get any real attention or effort put into their personalities. I figured the opposing Mahjong players at the Mahjong competitions would just be throwaway generic characters who existed solely to give the Mahjong Club someone to play against in order to advance the story. But man, was I completely wrong. Instead, the opposing characters were actually given quite a bit of screen time, and there were a lot of characters here. There are multiple schools competing at Mahjong, and each school has at least 4 members, usually more. While there are some cliche characters here, most feel pretty unique. Most of these characters were all given real personalities and backstories. In fact, there were times when I completely forgot about the main characters because they were giving so much screen time to these competitors. I found myself really caring about a lot of these characters, and there were times I really wasn't sure who I should be rooting for. They all have their own unique motivations for wanting to win and playing Mahjong, and I constantly found myself going beyond sympathizing with them to actually kind of hoping they would win. And there are some really heart-touching moments with these characters as well. Even more surprising is that there is actually character development with them too. The show does a good job with the limited time it has to show them evolve and grow as characters throughout the competitions. Of course, the main characters need to be interesting too, and they are. I do feel like there are some stereotypes here, but they are all still good characters. There is some meaningful character development here, and I really became invested in their success as both a whole and individually. My only criticism is that some of the characters looked a bit plain and generic. I think they were running out of character designs, but most of them have their own unique look within the context of the show and are well drawn. Most everyone stands out as an individual in both their character designs and personalities. And while I am talking about characters, I should mention the Yuli element in this show. It is there and is an obvious theme, but in the end, it never really goes anywhere. Saki and Nodoka have obvious feelings for each other, and the show sets this up from the first episode, but ultimately, the most you ever get is hand-holding, which is disappointing, especially since they give you those almost moments. There are also Yuli themes with the minor characters competing at the mahjong competitions. It is clear as day some of these girls have more than just feelings of friendship for each other. It is obvious they have romantic feelings, but the show just kind of leaves this on the surface and does very little to expand or flesh out these relationships. This seems to be a trend of most Yuli anime. They just constantly tease you the whole show, and then there is hardly ever any actual romantic conclusion. I'm not quite sure why this is. Manga doesn't seem to have this issue. There are lots of romantic Yuli manga with great romantic conclusions, but not so much when it comes to anime. The show also has a good deal of comedy. Not an overwhelming amount, as there is also a ton of drama, but there were still some hilarious moments, especially those involving Yuki. She pretty much provides the comic relief, along with Suga, who is one of the only guys in the show. Of course, I can't tell you about this show without mentioning the mahjong. The show does a really good job here. Competitions are very interesting, and it was fascinating watching the hands, or rather wins, play out. But to be honest, I had no idea what was going on. I thought I could learn a bit about mahjong by watching this show, but the mahjong play is obviously intended for people who understand mahjong. There is a lot of complicated stuff going on. I highly recommend watching this from a good subgroup with translation notes. I constantly had to pause this to read the notes about what was going on, and even after that, I really didn't know what was happening. By the end of the show, I stopped trying to figure out what was happening and just watched things play out. Even without fully understanding what was happening with the mahjong, it was still really fun to watch. This is partly because the results of the mahjong games played a role in the characters' struggles, but also partly because of the presentation. There are all kinds of special effects used during the matches. There are explosions, flashes, loud noises, and other effects. They also have these really neat moments where the girls turn into magical girls and have battles with each other. These fights aren't really happening, they are just symbolic, but they are cool nonetheless. There's also this weird supernatural element. Some girls seem to possess certain powers that can influence the outcome of a game. I think these are just supposed to be more passive things like being super intuitive or altering the flow of a game by changing the mood. I don't think they are outright superpowers. I'm not sure how I feel about this aspect, to be honest. I suppose it did spice things up a bit, and there were some really cool effects, but it did seem a bit weird. I would also like to point out one thing that really annoyed me. There is a bath scene where the girls are completely naked. The version I watched was uncensored, so there was no blur or anything covering the girls up. There was full-blown frontal nudity. My problem with this is that they had no detail. It was like staring at a naked Barbie doll. There just wasn't anything there. It was just weird. Why go through all the trouble of having full frontal nudity if you aren't going to fill in the details? I'm not 13, I don't get all excited when I see naked anime girls, but if you're going to do it, please do it right, or don't do it at all. And in case you are wondering, there is a little bit of fan service here, but not a whole lot. Just little bits here and there, and it doesn't really interfere with the show. Most of the fan service just consists of close-ups of Nodoka's massive boobs bouncing or jiggling a bit, or Yuki not tying her yukata properly so it is hanging off her and almost exposing her lolly chest. So, do I recommend this show? Absolutely. It has a fantastic cast of characters, and the mahjong is actually really interesting to watch. The Yuri does disappoint a little, but there were still some sweet moments. If you are looking for a change of pace, I highly recommend you give Saki a chance. And there you guys have it. This has been my mini anime reviews for April 2015. If you have any comments or suggestions as to how I might make these videos better, please let me know in the comments section below. I am always open to some constructive feedback. And if you have any questions regarding any of the shows I have discussed today, ask away and I will do my best to answer you. Also, let me know what you guys think of some of these shows if you've seen them. Anyway, thank you all for watching. This is Neko Mimi Anime signing off.